Between 1950 and the year 2000, we had peak silver. In fact, 34.57% of all silver mined was pulled out between 1950 and 2000. And since then, it's been declining. The system is trying to correct away from growth, is what I'm seeing. In terms of energy output, energy consumption per industrial output or physical activity output, we are seeing a turnaround where it's trying to go in a different direction. So instead of everything getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, it's now slowly turning around, and it's now trying to force a situation where more and more and more has to be put in to get less and less outcome.
You're watching CapitalCosm. My name is Danny. My guest today is Simon Michaux. He's a geologist and a PhD in engineering. Simon, thank you so much for coming on today.
G'day, Danny. Actually, technically, I'm a physicist, geologist, then a PhD in engineering.
Okay, I stand corrected.
And now I'm a data analyst in the industrial industries of all kinds.
You know, I really should get this right. I've known you for now, what, 3 years now?
So I work on the principle that things change, and I don't care what people call me. So,
well, you're Superman. You're Superman.
Hey, you. Here. Superman cannot be stopped. Yeah. And S for Simon. Anyway, g'day.
Don't make me spit out my coffee, Simon.
So, unless, of course, it's recording. Oh, it's recording. Oh, right.
It is recording. But this is why we've got an editor,
right? Who's been paid a lot, or
allegedly.
All right, so we've got things are pretty hot right now, and there's lots to talk about. And I've updated some of my work. So why don't you lead off with what we were talking about?
Yeah, so I want to connect this. I want to connect your work with what we're seeing right now in the silver and metals market. I'm looking at a silver price of just a little south of $120. It may break. It's probably going to break $120 by the time we put this episode out. But we're seeing something mysterious happen in the metals market. I mean, this does not appear to be like your run-of-the-mill retail speculation bubble, by all accounts. Because from the intel that I'm hearing, is these bullion dealerships are actually experiencing, record high selling as opposed to record high buying, at least here in the United States. There's something else going on here. I want you to walk us through your analysis on what you see happening in the silver market as well as the metals market. I think you guys are going to find this very fascinating. I don't think anyone else is talking about this and giving you this kind of analysis. So, Simon, give us your overall take and where you see this going.
When yesterday I was sitting in a conference for bankers, and they're all investors, and they actually sort of said, look, we're investors, blah, 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 blah. And so when it came to my turn to talk in the panel, it says, I'm not an investor, right? It's my purpose to complicate the life of anyone who is an investor. So I'm working in the real world. Right. So where I would kick off on is I'm seeing a series of patterns in the metals industry that I believe are explained by the Basel III banking accord going live in a legally enforceable context. This was a couple of weeks ago. So if I can just share my screen, how do I do that? Yep, share screen. Okay, so entire screen, right? Yep. Okay, let's go with that. Share. So I've got these notes. So is that in presentation mode? Are you seeing it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so these are some notes. So I'm going to kick off with what we are seeing is the Basel III banking accord was developed at the end of the 2008 global financial crisis. The system broke. Basically, they were called out on some of the dodgy things that they were doing. And they had we've got to do something moment. So they came up with the Basel III banking accord, which basically said we're not allowed to use paper instruments anymore. It was actually adhered to in 2021, as in everyone agreed. It was supposed to go live in January 2023. This is around the time when the Ukraine war kicked off, incidentally. But it's only in the last couple of weeks, we're talking like about maybe 10 days ago, it went live and it's now enforceable. What that means is paper gold and paper silver are no longer able to be sold with the same insurance classification, as in and so all banks were told to get out of silver positions by the end of January. Out of all paper positions. So what are they selling? They're selling paper silver. But what if there's more paper silver and paper gold than physical gold? So what are they selling? Okay, so we'll come back to that in a moment because you've got some very interesting information too. I'm going to pull up some charts that my mate Steve St. Angelo of the SRS Sirocco report put together a couple of years ago. He's been doing analysis on this for years. So this is gold. So gold production. What he's showing here is the big three gold producers of the North American system. Even though they're producing more gold, the yield is going down. They're having to work harder and harder and harder to get each ounce of gold. And they're using economies of scale. Here is silver. Again, this is Steve St. Angelo. Steve, if you're watching, thanks, mate. I do appreciate your work. This is the silver industry. And so what he's actually showing over time, yield is going down. What's happening there is grade is decreasing. And they're having to work harder and harder and harder to get each ounce of silver out of the ground. This is mining. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Global historical production back to 1493. Again, Steve St. Angelo. This is a nice data set. What he's showing here, give me I'm a simple man. Such things amuse me. All right. Between 1950 and the year 2000, we had peak silver. In fact, 34.57% of all silver mined was pulled out between 1950 and 2000. And since then, it's been declining. So I've been saying this is the model I've been putting together. We're in a system at the moment where the system rolls along and it's normal. It's like the invisible 1,000 cups. Something's sort of happening. Comes along 2005. And the system works, but there's visible signs of stress. This is the visible 1,000 cups. Something's wrong, something's wrong. We get to 2019, and this is the repo crisis. The LIBOR crisis and all that. The banks have a problem. The repo market liquidity crisis. The China foreign exchange system, which manages the interbank foreign trading system, experienced a sudden and significant crash. At this point, since 2019, which incidentally was around the time that COVID happened, we got a problem. So then we're heading into a situation where it crashes all at once. And many of the old institutions are wiped out and new ones will form really quickly. And so the idea is 2025 is in that red square. So we're coming to the end of that window. And then we've got an adjustment as new structure forms. And then there's a new equilibrium on the other side, whatever that is. So the all crash at once is in front of us. All nation states and corporations have been preparing for this point and consider it to be inevitable. So many of the old institutions and systems will be wiped out, new ones will form. And how they're talking about how can they position themselves in the new system, given the old system is about to be obsolete and irrelevant. And so what this means, it doesn't matter to any of the large players if the market melts down or if there's a default or peak, or they've been planning for it for all along. So there's nothing unusual about that. So where was I going with all that? So the idea was to go into this chart. So this is the chart that I've been showing for a while, where I overlay the prices. This is the metal prices that the World Bank tracks: base metals, gold and silver, and
hey Simon,
energy.
Simon, really quick, can you make the screen? Can you make the screen a little bigger?
Yeah. Isn't it showing the full screen?
It's
Are we?
showing.
Are you seeing the note screen? Hang on.
I'm seeing
Stop
a note
sharing.
screen, yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So this is a chart I've shown a couple of times. I'm about to show you an update. So these are the metals that are tracked by the World Bank to track the health of the industrial economy: base metals, precious metals, and oil, gas, coal, the energy minerals. The month of this goes back to 1960 January. The month of December 2001 is indexed to the number 100, which is that point in there. Okay, that's what happened in January 2005. I've updated it to include the COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukraine war. So as we go around, there's COVID-19 and there's the war in Ukraine. Now, what's actually happening here is the swings are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're starting to dwarf what we saw in the global financial crisis. The system's thermodynamically trying to correct, and we are preventing it from doing so. And so the blowouts are getting bigger and bigger until one day it's not going to be controllable.
How is it trying to correct itself?
So I think so this is actually related to energy. The whole system is geared on cheap energy, cheap available energy that flows really quick and easy, where energy is something like $20 a barrel. That's the sort of energy that the system's based on. Now, since 2005, oil has been more expensive. It goes up and down, but it's generally more expensive. It's also not as, it's got more steps associated with it to becoming more and more useful. I think a different kind of economics is trying to manifest in how the market forces are flowing. And so what we're seeing here is a form of inflation that is not, so let me get it back. So that's a form of inflation that's trying to manifest. The yellow was the gold. So gold is going up in a parabolic fashion. It's trying to actually, the price of some things are trying to blow out, or the price of other things are trying to slow down. Right. So the system is trying to correct away from growth, is what I'm seeing. Is in terms of energy output, energy consumption per industrial output or physical activity output, we are seeing a turnaround where it's trying to go in a different direction. So instead of everything getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, it's now slowly turning around, and it's now trying to force a situation where more and more and more has to be put in to get less and less outcome. And so from a physical activity point of view, things, we're trying to force it to grow when actually it's trying to contract.
And it's not just a supply bottleneck that's bottlenecking. It's also the demand that's expanding, because we obviously leverage more silver today than we've ever done before. We need all of these energy and metals resources to power now these AI data centers that are are being built all over the place. So we actually need these things way more than we've ever needed them. And sure enough, they become harder to mine and acquire than ever before.
So what I believe is happening is this. So I did not that one.
Oh,
hang on. This one. Come back here. Do as you're told. All right. So question: if history rhymes, it doesn't repeat, it rhymes. What period of history is most useful in describing what's happening to us now? What do you think?
I was going to say Weimar, but
everyone says Germany 1935. But watch this for Game of Soldiers. I put it into AI and asked AI what pattern recognition. This is what it came back with, and I looked into it and I agree with it. The fall of Constantinople in 1453. Right, so a siege. So after over 1100 years, the capital of Eastern Roman Empire fell. It's one of the most serious events in our history, and it really reshaped everything. So how things were done were completely different. the world didn't end, but it was fundamentally reordered and shaken up in context of economics and politics. This was a true black swan. It devastated the West at the time, and they lost economic control, political control, and military control. So the Ottoman control of the Bosphorus Strait, which is, where this is Constantinople became Istanbul, and it gave them dominance over trade between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. The empire became preeminent in power over the Eastern Mediterranean for centuries, until World War I ended. Constantinople was renamed Istanbul and became the Ottoman capital. The Ottoman expansion to southeastern Europe accelerated, threatening Christian kingdoms. The fall psychologically devastated Christian Europe and deepened the East-West civilization divide. Greek scholars fled the area, and they fled to Italy, bringing classical knowledge that basically fueled the Italian Renaissance. So economically, traditional overland trade routes between Europe and Asia came under Ottoman control. Europe faced higher tariffs and restricted access to lucrative Eastern goods like spices and silk. Does any of this sound familiar? Disrupted trade patterns motivated Western European powers like Portugal and Spain to seek alternative maritime routes to Asia. The search for new trade routes directly catalyzed the age of exploration to go and explore the New World, overseas expansion. Venice and Genoa, which had trading privileges in Constantinople, saw their commercial positions weakened, and it was the end of the Venetian Empire. The shift towards the Atlantic trade routes eventually diminished the Mediterranean's economic centrality to Europe. In other words, it was the end of Europe as a power bloc. So this is why, and so this is actually the scale of what I see we're happening here. We're seeing the rise and fall of empires. And so empires last, is it 100 years, 150, whatever it is. As one empire transfers between one and the other, there's always a period of disruption, and it's a new currency that becomes preeminent. And so the US dollar is in control now, and the BRICS dollar, which I believe is coming, or something like that. If it's not the BRICS dollar, it's something like that. Something the BRICS economies will control. I'm going to make the case of why that is. And we're in what I call Thucydides' trap. Do we go to war or not? So the US was oil, the British Empire was coal. And everyone before that, it was who controls the trade routes, the movement of stuff, which is really what energy is all about. Because if oil fuel for total liquids correlates with GDP, we are a transport-driven society more than anything else. Not energy, transport. Who controls the movement of stuff? And if minerals are the new oil, okay, which ones? So is it the BRICS dollar? Is it something else? Is the BRICS dollar a distraction? We'll see. Right, so I put together this model. Now, this is probably, 10 years old now. It's been updated a few times, but it's holding. I walk it back to the formation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. I also have got the column of the fourth turning, the idea that there's a cycle in American history, but it's also influenced all other Western history. Every 80 years, there's a massive war. 80 years ago, World War II. 80 years before that was the American Civil War. 80 years before that, the American War of Independence, all the way back to 1493. And within that 80-year cycle, there is 4 generations. And so they all do different things socially, and there's a pattern that goes between them. There's a book called The Fourth Turning that actually describes all this. It's quite interesting. So, formation of Federal Reserve, the Bretton Woods Agreement, discovery of oil, and the link between energy, and that's oil, and our currencies is established. The US dollar decouples from the gold standard. The petrodollar agreement is formed in 1973. Oil production plateaus. The metal price blowout that I showed you before starts there. The global financial crisis, which was caused a couple of years later, the weakest link broke. And at that point, the petrodollar system failed. And so the petrodollar alliance, which I'm going to show you shortly. So their plan B was the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TTIP, TISA, so an agreement between corporations of the world and the governments of the world to replace the petrodollar, which was to integrate everything away from the BRICS economies. Didn't work. So we're in Thucydides' trap. Now, what I believe's happened is if people...
And Simon, really quick, for those who
Yeah.
don't know, the Thucydides trap is when you have an emerging power meeting, closing the gap between it and then existing power, and then you run the risk of a conflict between the two.
I actually took the time to put this in, so let's do that first. So let's look at that. So Thucydides' trap describes the likelihood of war when a rising power threatens to displace an established ruling power, named after Greek historian Thucydides, who noted Athens' rise and the cause of fear in Sparta. It's the fear of the incumbent empire of what the rising empire might do. So he was a Greek historian and a general, and he studied the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. Right. So this is the signature. A growing power's ambition clashes with a ruling power's instinct to defend its position. The aspiring power seeks status and validation. The ruling power fears losing dominance, leading to insecurity and defense of the status quo. The historical pattern applied over the last 2,000 years. In 16 historical instances of this dynamic, 12 resulted in war, although some cases they were resolved through diplomacy. So, and that's the sequence that. So what we find ourselves in at the moment is, do we go to war or not? The US dollar is failing. Why is it failing? Well, it's a fiat currency. Why is it a fiat currency? Because they mismanaged the gold reserves with the Bretton Woods agreement. Okay, what happened there? And they replaced it with oil. Now we've got a point where peak oil is on the books. Peak crude oil production in its conventional form did indeed peak in November 2018 at the moment. Do we see an eclipsing of it? I don't know, but here we are 6 years later and it still hasn't happened. So if that is the case, peak oil is no longer a theory, it's an observation. If that is the case, then all fossil fuel reserves will now have to be revalued. That will be a breach of international contract law, and hilarity ensues. The main players, oil is actually concentrated in a very few countries, as is gas. They would know the true status of their reserves, right? So the idea that this will continue on forever and growth will be forever, they will know different. Okay, so the Ukraine war comes out. I believe the Ukraine war was orchestrated, and it's like a battle of wills that has nothing to do with Ukraine. I think Russia engaged in what it did to create a situation where it could use its gas reserves and its primary customer to leverage a position where its currency, the ruble, which is partially backed by physical reserves at the time, into a situation that would be allowed. And they were going to force the European Union to use the ruble as a trading platform. That is against the rules because the British petrodollar empire running out of London, the Anglo petrodollar system, they want their fiat currency to be the thing. So, but Basel III Banking Accord goes live. It went live in 2023, but it was legally enforceable a couple of weeks ago. And it recognizes gold and other commodities valid bank reserves, including silver. Right, that's live now. And so now we're starting to see the genesis of gold-backed and asset-backed currencies. I know China's planning to do something. I believe all BRICS nations are trying to do that. This is actually what the BRIC dollar is actually all about. Let's see if it survives. They might kill it. And this red sequence is what we're seeing. International contract law fails, free markets toxify, inelastic markets driven by realpolitik, geopolitics, international banking fails, nation-state assets seized by other nation-states. We're all seeing that now. And so what's coming is the China plan will run its course, and now the American plan will run its course. Europe has been knocked out of the game, basically by the Americans. Thanks, guys. But here's the interesting part. Agenda 2021 has a target date of 2030. It's 4 years away. The Great Reset. What is that? So more on that later. Okay, so where should we go from there? Should we go to the BRICS analysis, or do you want to go back to what we were talking about? Yeah, let's do that. Let's go back to where is.
Yeah, if there's anything more that we need to talk about in regards to the metals space, then I
So
think we should put a bow on that before we
yeah,
move on.
I was going to move into energy, and so and yeah, let's come back to that later if we have time. But I've got an analysis on what's actually happening in the American plan, and that's more energy based, not metals based.
Okay.
But that's what I believe is happening. Is the Basel III Banking Corp went live? They can't sell paper gold anymore or paper silver. They've been told to get out of paper silver quickly, which is why they're selling a lot of stuff. What are they actually selling though? And is it are they selling paper silver and gold versus physical silver and gold, or are they selling paper trying to buy physical? Now, silver is useful from an industrial perspective, as in it makes it's good for it's a component for semiconductor manufacture, and it's used in solar panels, and it's got some other electronic applications. Gold does not. But what that means is there's a big application for silver in industry, and those industry players have their demand, and they can't be pushed around in the same way. So you can push gold around, and that's only the currency manipulation that actually happens with that. You can't push silver around in the same way because it involves industry, and that's why I believe silver's going first. And so this is why we're seeing like an inelastic demand, and things are going bonkers in the last couple of weeks. And so perhaps you could show that pattern that you were showing me earlier.
Which one?
You were showing me a pattern in price, or you're talking about your opinion on why we're seeing this remarkable pattern, and you're seeing pressure from supply and demand.
Hey guys, quick pause from the podcast, but this is something I feel is really important to let you in on. Back in 2020, before I even started this channel, I was looking for an edge, a way to find the big opportunities most investors never even hear about. That's when I found Capitalist Exploits Insider. From day one, it felt like I suddenly had my own team of world-class market pros working for me, digging up trades all over the world, doing the deep research, and handing me ideas that had massive asymmetric upside. Stuff that I would never even think about. Since then, my gains with them have blown past the S&P and the NASDAQ, and it's honestly the single best newsletter I've ever subscribed to. And that's not me blowing smoke. That's for real. I've interviewed their publisher, Chris McIntosh, more times than I can count. In fact, my latest conversation with him is linked in the description box down below if you want to check that out, as well as a pinned comment. And every time, I'm reminded why I've stayed a member for years. Right now, they're offering a special $1,000 discount on the Insider subscription, but it's only for CapitalCosm viewers, so you're only going to get it by clicking the link down below in the description box or the pinned comment. You're not going to find this anywhere else. Click the link, lock it in, and start getting the same game-changing research I've been using since 2020.
Yeah, so I'm going to pull up the audience has pretty much seen this chart to death, but I'll go ahead and pull it up just so it can, people who may not have seen it yet. But it's essentially the 10-year, the U.S. 10-year yield overlaid on top of the silver price. And you'll notice some interesting tidbits here. So let's go ahead and share the screen.
So based on what I was just showing before, the system is fundamentally breaking from one thing to another, and it's fundamental. It's not a market action as such. It's a legislation compliance action.
Yep. You noticed that. So just a quick recap here, Simon. You'll notice that you've got the 10-year yield here in green, or sorry, the 10-year yield here in white. And you've got the price of silver here in green, and they're overlaid on top of each other. And you'll notice that the 10-year yield goes from a 40-year upswing to a 40-year downswing. And we broke out of that downtrend in 2022 after we froze Russia's assets. And that kind of sparked the imagination of investors worldwide. And they started looking for ways to exit out of U.S. bonds. And coincidentally enough, you have silver tracking the yield of bonds, of U.S. 10-year bonds. And that's because when yield goes up, the value of the bonds go down. And so when there's, when bonds lose their bid, the bid goes to silver, and the bid goes to gold and other neutral assets like that. And once we had a yield bear market, this downtrend, this pretty much coincided with the consolidation that we saw here in silver for 40 years, this cup and handle pattern. And so it's no surprise that once you see these breakout here in yields, you're also seeing a breakout here in silver as well. So the two are interconnected. So it looks like, these cycles, they take decades to play out. 40 years here to the upside, 40 years here to the downside. I would think this isn't just your typical run-of-the-mill retail bubble. This looks like it's part of a grander cycle at play here.
So here's the powder keg that I believe the fuse has been lit. If paper assets are now a problem, you're not allowed to use them. What does that mean for the derivatives market, which is essentially paper? And the derivatives value is something like 40 times the entire assets summed together on planet Earth.
It's in the quadrillions, isn't it?
Something like that. No one knows. Is it 1.2 quadrillion? Is it a mere 500 trillion? Mere. So what does that mean? And so to me, they deregulated derivatives in the year 2000, and it became a trading instrument that became accepted, and hilarity ensued, and the criminals were allowed to do what criminals do. So so things went absolutely bonkers. What happens if that's not allowed to be used anymore? In fact, I've got a chart that actually. Hang on.
It basically implies the end of the paper market pricing for all of these metals and commodities.
Yeah. So there's a chart that I use. I think I've shown it to you before, but I'm going to show it again. But it's pertinent to what you're talking about here. So what I've done here is taken world GDP and oil production and overlaid the start from the same point, 1965 equals 100. And so in the beginning, when we were winning, physical work was economic value. Energy was physical work. Physical work was economic value. Economic value was GDP, and they overlaid perfectly. When the US dollar decoupled from the gold standard, it started to diverge, and they could just print money to do whatever. And this is where we're at now, because around 2000, which is this point here, they devalued the derivatives market, and they started including financial instruments in GDP. And so, the magical mystery tour took off. And so this run up here, this change in gradient as we sort of run up here, that I think is the impact of the derivatives market. So if the derivatives market becomes not viable anymore, as in we're not allowed to do it, and you're not allowed to sell derivatives anymore, you're not allowed to buy them or whatever that looks like, do these two lines come back together? So
is oil going to go up, or is GDP going to come down, or both?
I think something else entirely. I think oil is going to become it's going to become inelastic, and it's not going to become a market anymore. It's just going to check out. It's going to become a strategic asset, and it will be a strategic asset subject to offtake agreements and geopolitical alliances. Who's mates with who? And it won't be. It'll become for a while. The prices will go up, or it could be that no one's got any money. No one's got any money, and this is the Doomberg analysis. We're awash with oil and gas at the moment because, and that is, well, we're all saturated with debt. No one's got any money. We'd like to do stuff, but we can't, right? And so that analysis that they do is actually, maybe that's what's happening. But does that mean the price is about to spike, or does it crash? I don't know. What it does suggest is that it's about to become geostrategic, which means it may be taken off the public market, and it'll become something else that we haven't seen before.
I mean, what would that mean for the, from an investor standpoint? Like if you own oil companies, if you own oil producers like Exxon, or if you own like oil service companies, what would that imply for them?
I think we're in uncharted territory, so it could be anything. Does that mean all of a sudden they're rich? Does it mean we hit into economic volatility? But if you happen to own oil and gas, your price may not go up or down, but you're still allowed to have access to the system when no one else does, because you've got attachment to a strategic asset. Are you in a situation where these projects get nationalized and you just lose everything? Or is it just as simple as the markets hold and everyone who's got oil and gas becomes very wealthy? I actually don't know. I don't think anyone knows. It's such a complex beast to look at. The implications behind the American strategy that's rolling forward does suggest that the American system only has a little bit longer to go while it's still got the authority to dictate terms for the rest of the world, and they're using that to secure certain things before they get to the point where they're just not listened to anymore by parts of the planet. And what does that mean for markets? Well, then the question is, does contract law continue to happen? Like, do we still have contract law? If I had stocks in an oil company and I wanted to sell them, would that be recognized? Would I be allowed to sell them? Yeah, if you hold gold, for example, in Italy, I think it was Italy when I saw this, you're required to hand in a list to the government to claim the fact that you've actually got gold. How much gold? Where do you store it? You're then required to pay a 12% tax on that gold to say that, well, that gold is now assigned to us. But what's happened in every historical time in the past? Well, there's a knock on the door and that gold is confiscated, or they're pressured to hand it over. Well, come on, guys. The law, the ethics, the morals, or are we moving into a place where things are just going to go a bit nuts for a while?
I interviewed Martin Armstrong about this, and he said one of the reasons why platinum is also getting a bid is because of the fear of capital controls on gold and silver, whereas platinum doesn't have a history of capital controls. So not yet, at least. You think that they're going to take that? There's a good possibility that they expand beyond gold and silver if they ever do impose capital controls.
I also saw copper up here. In that context, I don't understand what that would look like, because you've got copper is not very expensive at the moment. Like, would that be sensible? I don't know. Like capital controls. We're in a place at the moment which is unprecedented. I'm looking at industrial data, like the flows of stuff, but also the point of the view of who owns what, who does what, who controls what. But in history, if we're in a system where we agree is run by criminals, right? Like one of the reasons, for example, that Trump's just throwing his weight around and he's getting away with it is that for some time now, below the surface, the system is always just the people at a certain level of the system have just done whatever they wanted and snubbed their nose at the law. And that's just the way it was, and no one could stop them. And now that Trump's in control, he's all, screw it. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Vote me out? So he's just doing it. And so I think he's trying to put things in place in the next 36 months while he's still president, him and Emperor Musk, that will, and the rest of the world just goes along with it, because that's the way things have been going all this time. At a certain level, things have been going. The law has been a farce. The law is only for want of a better word, the little people. The criminals who own and control the system have done what they want with impunity for a long time. And I suspect they've let Trump do what he's doing, because if they challenge him on it, their own dirty laundry at a treason level will suddenly become apparent. And we will move on from a conversation of, oh, he broke the law, or he said a mean thing on tweets, to let's get those guillotines out again. And they don't want that. So that's just easier to just let Trump have his special way of doing things.
At least for the next 3 years. So
Yeah,
until
36
they
months.
potentially get back into power.
Well, so they've got 35 months. Is it 35? So something like about 3 years. At which point he's pushing 80, right? So he's going to stand down, and whoever's backing him will now back someone else. Who is that someone else, and what do they do? And in those 3 years, what do they achieve? And they're moving at a velocity to get things done.
So speaking of getting things done, what is, because you were just telling me you think that you've unraveled what Greenland is all about. So
Sure.
talk to us
Okay.
about Greenland.
Okay. So let me sharing screen, entire screen. I want it all. So let me first go through the BRICS analysis, and then we'll go to the American pattern.
Sure.
Right. So, okay. So, question: how often have we gone to war in a place where there's oil? So,
100% of the time.
well, so this is places where oil wars have happened, but also where economic sanctions have been applied, which is also an act of war. So the column on the left is where the battles have happened, and the column on the right are the people who are engaging in the conflict. The people on the right are all in alliance, and they trade with each other. Iraq, come back here. Iraq used to be an ally of the United States until they were thrown under the bus in the first Gulf War in 1991, and then they became an adversary. So this was in all of these places. There's reserves, production, and consumption on both sides of the chart. And so what's going on here? So it's not a case of one group wants to take oil from the other because they don't have any. Right. So who benefits and what this is? So who controls the oil market as we approach peak oil? All of this was prior to 2018. So the aggressors and the recipients have reserves and production and consumption, right? This is about who controls the oil and gas market. So you've got the West on one side, and what on the other side is what later become the BRICS. So this is to give war a chance. All right. So the petrodollar alliance, United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, European Union, Kuwait, Iraq, Norway. Iraq and Kuwait are in here because they're under a military occupation for a while, and now they're US friendly. So there's their oil reserves, their oil production, crude and condensate, and the year of peak production. And there's the same thing for gas. Right. So we're talking about 28.8% of world oil reserves and 13% of gas reserves. Right. So this group has access to the world reserve currency. They have the SWIFT banking system. Now, the SWIFT banking system is like an exchange, financial exchange. Who's the board of directors? National Bank of Belgium, US Federal Reserve, Bank of England, Bank of Japan, European Central Bank. It's the West. So Russia was threatened with expulsion in 2022, and this is the group that froze the Russian assets in breach of international contract law. The petrodollar agreement, where the petrodollar means that all oil sales are done in US dollars. Certainly in the first couple of decades, that's now breaking down. There's also the global footprint of military bases. It used to be over 1,200 that they admitted to. Now it's 750, which that's an empire. That is an empire. 750 military bases in 80 countries around the world. Right, so this is BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China. So these are the founding members. So they started out with about 8.7% of oil reserves and 25% of the gas reserves. I think this was formed to the purpose of getting out from under the petrodollar, Anglo-petrodollar alliance. South Africa joined. Okay. Then a whole lot of partners joined. So now we're talking about 28% of oil reserves and 52% of gas. And I think it's the gas industry that's being used as leverage because it's still expanding. So Saudi Arabia is sitting on the fence. They said they might join and they might not. And they might go back to America. If they did join, now we've got 45% of oil reserves and 56% of gas reserves. So BRICS are developing their own alternative to SWIFT. and they don't have a unified system yet, but everyone's got like a version of it, and they're cooperating. They then showcased their BRICS dollar proposal in 2024, and everyone poo-pooed it and snubbed their nose at it. So this is the footprint of BRICS versus the Western Alliance. You're looking at the Thucydides trap of this era. Who's got oil, gas, and gas? And does the UK and EU go to war with Russia, also China and Iran? Or more colloquially, the Western Petrodollar Alliance versus the BRICS Commodities Alliance. So, yeah, we've been through that. So 2022, Russia demanding payment for natural gas in rubles as a consequence of sanctions. 23, UAE settling oil trades in Indian rupees. 2024, Saudi Arabia will now settle oil trades in multiple currencies. The US dollar is still used, though. Venezuela was on the verge of officially integrating its energy sector into the Chinese cross-border international bank system, CIPS. They were preparing to price their entire reserves not in dollars, but a basket of currencies led by the yuan and backed by gold. That's what they're about to do. And in earlier this year, a few weeks ago, really, it was only January 3, a couple of weeks ago, U.S. forces raided and they took the Maduro president and his wife. So, okay, who is this guy? I mean, really, the sitting state, the sitting head of another nation state, and they're going to take it. So what's really sort of happening there? So, okay, so let's go out of that, and now let's go to the American system. So now before we get to the American system, man, I've still got this problem. I've got Windows problems I'm trying to resolve.
No worries. We can always edit it out.
Yeah. So I get hacked every now and then.
Do you?
And still, and no one can explain to me why. All right, let's just ignore all that, and let's go to how I developed this. Okay, so I've been looking at what do we really want to know? Why is my analysis different to everyone else's? So I'm looking at, so this is the goal, which is the idea of what's the true operational theory of constraints. And this is like, but it's told from a financial perspective. But what are we really wanting to know from a real materials context? And I'm using the mathematics of ecology and Howard Odum to develop a system. So we're talking about industrial ecology and how do the moving parts fit together. So this is my thinking. All right, I'm also studying information warfare. So these books have proven to be very useful in understanding fifth generation warfare. So what's fifth generation warfare? Well, it's warfare of all kinds. It's hybrid warfare. And I believe we've been in a hybrid warfare for about 30 years. Information warfare, psychological control, political and diplomatic, economic, and so on. And so they use game theory to fit the parts together. And this is where the leadership true resides, which is why it's so hard to see. But they say all soldiers, people, and units move with one mind and one goal, and anything can be used to influence society or to harm it. And that's now the battleground. And so anything goes. Now, it's nothing new to us. This book, Silent Weapon for Quiet Wars, describes how to set up an economic weapon. And it goes through the actual process. This was quite an eye-opener for me. So it's nothing new. Right, so what this is, the Western approach, and particularly the American, is like chess. Take out the enemy king. The Chinese approach is more like go, take over territory, do it slowly. And then there's the question, so what does India, Russia, Japan, and South Korea do? Well, China controls the majority of the industrial system, so what's their plan? Do they have one? The answer is yes. Have we misunderstood what's happening? And are we looking at the wrong things? Yes, we are, and I believe we've been convinced to do so as a fifth generation warfare outcome. Then what might we do about it? So I saw patterns between these books. Made in China 2025. So I'm going to quickly go through the China plan, which will put the American plan in context.
Okay.
The Chinese want absolute control of everything industrial on planet Earth by 2049. They call it the 100-year marathon. And why that 100 years is the 100-year anniversary of when Mao took power in 1949. At the moment, the patterns being told from the industrial in military intelligence concept are also seen in the industrial data. The long-term, full-spectrum global domination through control of the industrial value chain. If you want to do anything industrial at all, you've got to do business with Chinese interests in some form. That's the objective. This was their policy. If we first saw a resource plan in 2001, they actually studied the first Gulf War in 1991 very carefully from a military context, and they rewrote the art of war into a new strategic doctrine to include information warfare. And so they did a military one first, and then there was an economic resource one second. And so Made in China 2025 came out in 2015. And so that's now sort of running. Okay, so this is the material feedstock for global manufacture. So this is for the globe. So we're chasing rare earth elements all the time, but really it's a tiny proportion of the fraction. The Chinese happen to control the rest of the system as well. Now, you might notice smelter production of metals is where they've got the control. This is what they do in their Chinese territory. Then on top of that is what Chinese capital controls. So they're actually on the way to actually get their plan secured, and they're doing it. And so what history taught Mao? So studying Mao, this guy was interesting. He did a really ruthless study of what really happened in the Opium Wars. And in 1926, he published a study where he mapped out the proportions of classes in Chinese society, and he made a plan to weaponize one group against the other. Mao also studied Darwin in context of why some economies and nations succeeded and why some failed. Unfortunately, he mistranslated survival of the fittest to elimination by the strong. And this is another problem. When you actually go down to the philosophical origins of Marxism, you actually sort of see some very, very unfortunate definitions, which is why I think what happened. The United States was studied in detail, in particular, how the US surpassed Great Britain and Europe between 1850 and 1950, and how often dodgy stuff we call gunboat diplomacy was used, and industrial espionage, the role of private company versus the role of the state government. And so we're a bit duplicitous about it, but they learned those lessons very well. World War II was studied. So the majority of successful strategic actions focus on the destruction of the enemy's industrial capability and the enemy's supply of strategic resources, whereas the lack of experienced personnel became important in the final stages. The theft of cutting-edge technology and the assassination of leading enemy scientists was a priority, and the development of domestic industrial capability and production was more important than casualties taken. And that's what Mao came to the conclusion by studying history, and he developed the Chinese plan. So China's been preparing for war for decades. History is being terraformed. There's now a generation of PhD class scholars that have been taught a parallel version of history. And the Chinese society is being motivated and mobilized by remembering what happened historically in the Opium Wars. And they say that this is our century. And the Tiananmen Square massacre was a turning point. And 2049, as the 100-year target, was developed at that time. The PRC government diagnosed the United States in particular as their long-term enemy. And the greatest strategic concern was the internet, internationally and domestic. They need control of the flow of information domestically and internationally, the shaping of information internationally to camouflage China's true progress. And they were very successful at that for about 20 years. And the internet was seen as a weapon of opportunity. So the cost of doing business, industrial strategy was developed by the Communist Party last couple of decades, has been unique and effective. The cost of operations and economic activity in China was driven down and kept compared to what is the standard of the West. So the cost of labor was cheap. Regulations to facilitate economic activity was in Chinese terms. Environmental compliance was essentially lip service. Just so, it made economic sense to relocate manufacturing in industry to China. And that's what's been happening since the 70s. Right. There were strings attached. Ownership of the company had to be 51% Chinese. And what that meant was intellectual property required to manufacture the products became Chinese through that ownership. So that's how they took over. Right. So this is what I wanted to show you about the American plan. This is a map called the Technate of America. It came from the technocracy movement in the 1930s. You might notice we've got everything from Greenland, Canada, Alaska, and the 1930s. When did America buy Alaska from the Russians? Canada, Mexico, Central America, including the Panama Canal, half of Colombia, and Venezuela, all as one group. That is what they envisioned. And so here's the political map to show those things. And so to put them together, so we've got all this all the way out down to Venezuela and Colombia. Okay, what's going on here? So here's the oil and gas reserves. And so, yeah, this whole region. Turns out Greenland has big reserves either side of it as well. And so here is South America. Venezuela happens to represent a vast amount of, they're the largest reserves of oil on the planet, even though it's very poor quality. Here's Canada. What's also happening is minerals. So here's Canada, Mexico, here's the mines, and this is what's in the US in terms of critical minerals. And this is only some of what's there and available. So, and this is Greenland. And so Greenland is, so this is rare earth element, global reserves for rare earth elements. It was 110 million tons. Greenland has 1.5 million. So we're talking about less than 1% of the rare earth minerals. So that's not why they're after Greenland. So this is the Monroe Doctrine. So this is the foundation of the US foreign policy, and it was proposed in 1823. It declared the United States would view any European attempts to colonize or interfere in the affairs of nations in the Western Hemisphere as acts of aggression requiring US intervention, which is hilarious when you consider the actions of the US over the last 80 years. So it's about non-colonization, where European powers would no longer establish new colonies in the Americas, and the Western Hemisphere was considered closed. The European nations could not interfere with independent nations in the Americas. This is hilarious. The hypocrisy here is amazing. So US non-involvement. In return, the United States pledged not to interfere in European affairs. Yeah. Okay. So if you've got the time, look at this document, the National Security of the United States, released in November 2025. This is their plan. So the core philosophy, America first. Realism that rejects global hegemony and prioritizes sovereignty and economic security, reduced intervention, and burden sharing with allies. In other words, they're withdrawing from the global empire. So it's the Western Hemisphere first. It reasserts the Monroe Doctrine to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere. From a metals and materials context, they are repurposing and developing all 5 levels of the industrial ecosystem domestically in America, where they control everything behind domestic borders. They're not reliant on anything internationally. Military resources are shifted towards America, away from other regions. They're withdrawing from the Pacific, and they're withdrawing from the Europe. They haven't actually withdrawn from the Pacific yet, and I think the reason there is they want the Taiwanese semiconductor industry to become American. And migration is seen as the primary threat. So this is the 5th generation warfare. Mass migration, which is what's happened to Europe, incidentally. Thank you, George Soros. Mass migration was deemed as a major external threat to the United States, more than China, Russia, or terrorism. Border security is positioned as central to national security. And economic, the strategy treats trade, tariffs, and export controls, industrial policy, and nearshoring of supply chains as core national economic security tools. They're saying the quiet part out loud, emphasizing domestic reindustrialization, protection of American workers. So regionally, Europe is, well, the strategy warns that Europe faces civilizational erasure. Mind you, what the Americans did to Europe by demanding they sanction Russia, their principal energy source, and then abandoning them. Yeah, great. And it's the Americans and the British that have kept the Ukraine war going for so long and has prevented a diplomatic solution. That's great. China, they approached to contain China's influence while maintaining economic ties. So I think they're going to withdraw from the China sphere, and I suspect they are going to confront China in Africa. Indo-Pacific, while still important for deterrence and maritime security, this region is no longer the top priority, with a greater emphasis on allied burden sharing, which is, read between the lines there. The strategy emphasizes strength through military deterrence, coercive and transactional diplomacy based on material interests, and then values promotion. So instead of ideology, it's give us your stuff. It's what they've always done, but now they're saying it out loud. And right, so this brings us to tonight. Where did that come from? So this is the technocracy movement. So what's technocracy? So it's a controversial movement that appeared in the early 20th century, and it peaked in popularity in 1930. So what I'm about to show you is from the 1930s. The movement proposed replacing partisan politicians and business people with scientists and engineers that had technical expertise to manage the economy. Now, Elon Musk's grandfather was one of the people that developed this. And what's happening domestically in the United States at the moment, with Musk's involvement in the beginning of the Trump expertise, and what's happening there, systems are being wiped out and replaced with AI. What does AI look like in this? So rather than democracy and popular vote, technocrats advocated for governance by technical experts making decisions based on scientific data and engineering principles. Or in other words, AI governed by a small number of people to the interests of those small number of people that are interested in power. The term technocracy was coined by William Henry Smythe. The rule of the people made effective through the agency of their servants, scientists and engineers. It's a nice thing, but they've gotten control of it. So where did all this come from? Howard Scott and Marion King Hubbard founded Technocracy Incorporated in 1932 and proposed that money be replaced by energy certificates. So this is where the idea, I think, came from the petrodollar and agreement in 1973, where oil was directly linked to a currency. And so they, what do they say? So they want to replace the price system with energy-based metrics as units of value, arguing that price and abundance are incompatible. And the merging of Canada, Greenland, Mexico, and the US as parts of Central America into a single continent called the Technate, and that's the map I showed you. Production and distribution would rather be managed scientifically based on efficiency calculations rather than market forces, with reduced work hours through automation. So now you're looking at the foundation of the ESG movement. Political, no place for traditional politics, politicians, finance, or financiers. Decisions made purely on technical and engineering grounds. So who do they make that, and to whose benefit, and to what metrics of success? So that's how we get that map there. So this is.
But here I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a bit, Simon.
Yeah.
And this doesn't mean I endorse it completely, but doesn't this sound favorable to the system we currently have today? I mean, you look at politicians, and because in China they have engineers running the place, we have lawyers running the place, and a lot of our guys are just really dumb.
Right, true. So I agree with that.
Wouldn't it be preferable to have scientists and engineers run the country?
So the answer is yes, but so what the problem with the existing system is someone got groups of interest groups got control of it, and that control has been used to the interests of a small group where everyone else is drained. The idea of democracy was pretty good in the beginning, and it still is, and we should do it, but the system has sort of gone off the rails a little bit, and now we need to actually sort of clean out some corruption. What's being proposed here is the idea of control exerted to a series of metrics. Yes, you've got engineers and scientists, but now you've got AI. You know the idea of, for example, of the 15-minute city, where you're not allowed to go past certain boundaries. You're not allowed to consume certain resources. And we're in a police state with surveillance. That's actually what the technate has become. The technate in its beginning, that the people who envisioned it in the beginning envisioned what they sort of seen here, but it was also a form of democracy, and they did actually envision a better world. Someone's gotten hold of that, and they now control that. Put that with the transhumanist movement, for example, or what's happening with AI in terms of the management of resources, where most people are contained, but a small number of people are above the law. This is not for everyone, is the problem. This one says there's a map at the end of this, which we'll come back to this, and then that might put that together. So this is the administration chart. It's just a new form of politics. This is what they proposed in 1930. So what they're basically saying here, is the amount of time people will be required to work would decrease as we increase physical production. This is what happens when we automate everything. What they're saying is they could make a technology-based society, and automation would take over. So they're predicting what's happening now back in the 1930s, and they saw it as a way of freeing society. That may well have been true back then. So the movement sort of lost ground in the 1930s and everything, but they're still around. They're still sort of promoting this. So what we're seeing now is this. So we've got the idea of the Great Reset, where you'll own nothing. You'll own nothing. You'll have no privacy, but you'll never be happy. So what's going to come out of that is a cryptocurrency similar to Bitcoin, but it's controlled from a central point. A social credit system similar to Sesame in China, but that's now being rolled out in Vietnam. And environmental social management, ESG, that's basically what will be allowed. We've also got the police surveillance state, where digital privacy is gone. And we've also got the idea of ownership. Anything that's attached to a bank loan, for example, when everything crashes, I believe the banking sector will reclaim everything, and the banks themselves will be reclaimed by whoever owns them. So stuff will be owned by someone else, as we're talking about a new kind of society. And that's actually, it's a version of technocracy, but not the original version where we have engineers and scientists working for the greater good, but engineers and scientists working to a series of objectives set to them by someone else that we would not necessarily agree with. And then we've got transhumanism is on the other side of that, which is focused on human enhancement, longevity, transcending biological limitations, but if it's used as a control system. Some of Catherine Austin Fitz's concepts that she presents, for example, would appear on this map. So yeah, so this is what I believe technocracy has become. And that's why I believe the future that we should work towards will and have scientists and engineers in a greater control, but in a decentralized system, not a centrally controlled system. And this thing of the police state and a social credit system, I don't think we should have any of that. So that was basically the what I'm trying to say there is this is what I believe is happening. Stop sharing. This is what I believe is happening, and so the Chinese have their plan. They're trying to get control of stuff, and they've been quite successful at it. The US now is trying to control things domestically. They want Greenland, they want Canada, they want Mexico. We're now starting to see Cuba appearing in the news feeds. Why is that? Venezuela. What do they do in Venezuela? And okay, they took the president out, but they've now got a Venezuelan president running things. And have the Americans actually taken anything? So what we're seeing at the moment, I think, is something other than what's being presented to us. Like, has Venezuela signed on to the American flag? No. Like something else is in progress. But what I believe is happening is the Americans are withdrawing from the rest of the world, and now they're thinking in terms of imperialism in a local context. Now, every power group is going after their bottlenecks. China is going after the South China Sea and Taiwan. They're also ensuring the Belt and Road Silk Initiative and the BRICS strategy that's being rolled out is going to happen. That's their priority. The Russians are going after Ukraine, as in that's they see that as one of the bottlenecks. They're also part of the BRICS initiative, and their primary objective is to demilitarize NATO, which is what the Ukraine war has been all about. They have drained the military capability of NATO to the point where if there was a large military engagement now, NATO probably couldn't afford to do it. So Europe was a powerhouse, but the moment they were convinced to sanction the Russians, and the Russians who supplied their gas stopped supplying that gas, and now that gas has gone to China, meant that they are deindustrializing, and so they are no longer an industrial power. And so, okay, so they're now withdrawing. So the UK and Europe are now sort of waning fast. And so you got the big three now.
Why are the UK and Europe still hard-headed in the sense that they're still pushing all this woke politics and this green energy stuff? Well, it seems like the rest of the world has pretty much moved on from that. They're pretty much the only group still hanging on.
That's the strategy they've actually put together. That was their strategy to ensure their long-term survival. The woke stuff was social engineering, which would actually help unroll the system, where they were hoping that the Anglo banking system would be replaced by what? The next generation system, whatever it is. They're going to move. Fiat currencies will collapse, but something will take their place. They were hoping that the European Union CBDIC system, I think they were hoping that would take off. And there's no graceful way out for the people behind that. And so what do? Now what? And I think they've got no choice but to double down and triple down on that, because that was their plan. The ESG, the woke. So the woke strategy is very interesting. I see that as an outcrop of the communist strategy. Now, the woke stuff was critical theory was developed in the School of Frankfurt in the 1920s, when they realized that communism wasn't working the way they thought. They didn't actually predict. They predicted that capitalism would eat itself. But what happened was human relations laws came in and actually got control of things, and the average person did have a path to own their own house and have their own autonomy and be not necessarily millionaires and billionaires, but gain control of their own life. And the idea that there were human rights and there were laws and all of that, that basically meant that the communist strategy of the proletariat didn't work out the way they hoped. And so they came up with a new strategy of critical theory, which was an action to try and destabilize the Western societies, which would then allow the rest of the communist strategy to go forward. And the woke strategies that we're seeing are the new Red Guard. You saw that in South Korea with the 4B movement, to punish, what was it, the 4B movement, which was brought to America to punish those men who voted for Donald Trump. Their partners would now not withhold no sex, no dating, no children, no marriage, the 4Bs. Right. Well, Mao's original Red Guard was given the 4 olds to destroy: old values, old customs, old thoughts, all that. And so it's a it's a 5th generation warfare structure. Who's behind it? That's another story. But the people who are behind that, see, the 5th generation structure is very vulnerable, and it's a waterfall faction, as in you've got a waterfall structure. Things have got to happen in a particular order. And if the strategy has been diagnosed before they get to a certain point, then they're very vulnerable to just the whole thing falling over. So they weren't successful soon enough before enough people saw and understood what was happening. So the strategy has failed. And the people involved and convinced to do that are now starting to understand that they've been hung out to dry, which is really sad. Because the people involved probably thought they were doing the best for humanity, but really they were just pieces on a chessboard to try and take political power by destroying something. Their purpose was to destroy. So But the architects of that strategy have no graceful way out. What do we do? So what do you do? And so there's no graceful way out. So they just got to keep moving forward in the hope that something happens, something breaks. So they're still doing the old thinking. They're still doing the old strategies. The British, so the punch up in Ukraine is a battle of wills over which financial system is allowed to survive. The Anglo-petrodollar system managed out of London, or the BRICS Commodity Alliance. If the fiat currencies which are saturated by debt are called out and there's no other strategy to take its place, it must fall. And that's the difficult situation they're in. And so I suspect they are furiously trying to develop a counter strategy, but I don't know what that is yet.
All right. Well, we'll leave it at that for now, Simon, and we'll be tuned in for the next episode with you on. So anything else you actually want to talk about before we take this thing home?
Yeah.
Put a bow on it?
We are seeing things happen now real time. Like pay attention to what's happening. Like, someone's told me to keep a diary because we are living through remarkable times. I don't have the patience for that. But what we are seeing now, timing is very important. And so we might start seeing the volatility and be ready for anything. And so, I was talking to some students today. What would happen if your phone did stop working for a week? Or what would happen if your FPOS card, your debit card, didn't work for a week? Now what? Don't be surprised if we start seeing structural breaks like that. But it's the ability to be flexible, understand that structural things are breaking in the background. Don't panic. Human innovation is a thing. We can innovate past this. The world is not ending, it's changing. And it's changing fast, and it's changing now.
Interesting. Well, Simon, thank you so much for your time, my friend. Wise words as always. Incredible insights, too, that no one else is talking about. Where can people find you if they want to see more of your work?
So, simonmichaux.com is my website that I keep my published reports on. Also, prometheannexus.com is where I've got my plan.
All right. We'll have the links to both of those down below. So be sure to check them out, guys. And if you enjoyed this podcast, drop us a like and comment, Go Simon Go, in the comment section. Let me know your thoughts. Did you agree? Did you disagree? Let me know why you agreed and why you disagreed. Either way, I do, in fact, read the comments. And by liking, subscribing, commenting, hitting the bell notification as well on the side, you do help in pushing this episode and this message out into the algorithm. And you do help support this channel in the process as well. So a little bit does go a long way. And of course, check out our good, whole host of links down below in the description box. Whole host of affiliate links. I do get a cut, but you get a great product in return. We've got the Boolean Standard Pro membership with a 10% off discount for the first month. You're looking to add more into your gold and silver stack. We've got the Trends Journal. We've got the Capitalist Exploits newsletter. We've got discounts and all that stuff and more. Check out the description box for the affiliate links as well. So, all right, guys, I appreciate your time. I will catch you all next time.